in depth on the Individual Artist Commission. And you'll find as I go through this that this is one of the more straightforward categories that we offer, and you'll see that the application is the most straightforward application. So this category supports the creation of new work by an artist, and it must engage a segment of the community through a small-scale public presentation of the work or community involvement during the creative process of the artist project. I'll talk about this more, and I talked about it a bit at the beginning of the session, but we don't say and/or for a reason, because it is it's a $2,500 grant. It's not a ton of money. It's not intended to fund a major final public presentation. And that's why we say small scale public presentation. It's meant to be focused on your creation expenses. And I really don't recommend going for both of these, doing a public presentation and doing, involving a community during the creative process, because it really broadens the scope of what the artist is being asked to do and becomes lacking in feasibility for the amount of money that we have. Unless, of course, you have a big additional grant coming in, you have other funding. But if the $2,500 is really the scope of your project, pick either the public presentation or community involvement during the creative process. Presentations and community involvement may be done in person or virtually, and grant awards are determined by a peer review panel made up of artists. We have an example here of Brad Scher. His group Paper Heart Productions did Dragon Circus, which took place, a puppetry project that took place in Poughkeepsie, right on in the main area there on Poughkeepsie. And so it was, he created all of these puppets, and then he, brought them to a public event outside so that people could engage with them. Crystal Yang was funded a few years ago for Neo-Hudson River painting. She did a great series of paintings that incorporated traditional Chinese styles of painting and the Hudson River School of Painting. And so this was an example of somebody who really just, she worked on her own in her studio and then had a presentation. Julia Whitney Barnes did a great project, Hudson River of Bricks, where she collected and cast and glazed a ton of bricks that were produced along the Hudson River, and then did an installation piece where the bricks were arranged in the exact shape of the river. And it was a really cool, large scale public art installation. Jovan O'Neill did a great project in Newburgh, From Big Street to the Grave. He's a poet, and he did worked on his own to do a new series of poetry, and then presented some of that poetry through a workshop that he held at the Newburgh Free Library, which, as you can see, was like really, really well attended. So this was a great project where he worked on his own to do his project, his writing, and then shared that and taught as a part of his final presentation. Jing Shui did a project a few years ago called Fan Your Talents, where she taught, she choreographed traditional Chinese fan dancing performance and painted on her own fans. And then as the presentation, she worked with the public to choreograph their own dances and present them. And then Roberto Juan Rodriguez did a great project, Afro-Cuban Percussion, where he worked with students while he was composing his own music, he was working with the students to do some collaborative compositions. And so it was really focused on bringing Afro-Cuban music into a contemporary context with, with teenagers who were bringing their own musical sensibilities into the composition process. The goals of this program are to support Dutchess, Orange, and Ulster County artists in the creation of new work, support underrepresented artists in our region, including Black, Latino, Indigenous, Asian, people of color, LGBTQIA, and disabled artists. All artists are encouraged to apply, and to highlight the vital role of artists within a community. And so that's really where that public component comes into play. It's about, this grant is really about, funding an artist to create their work, having that have an impact on their trajectory of their career, but also the public seeing that work and understanding why it's so critical to have artists in the community. Eligibility. Artists can apply directly to the individual artist commission, and applicants may submit one grant proposal to this funding opportunity per year. Must be at least 18 years of age at the time of submission, must be a resident of Dutchess, Orange, or Ulster County in New York State, may not be enrolled in a full-time degree program. Part-time degree programs are okay. Artists, collectives, groups, and artist collaborations are not eligible. Projects must be independent work initiated by the artist. As I said earlier, cannot be like a building is commissioning an artist to create something. It should be something initiated by the artist. And artists who received this commission previously may apply again. If the commission took place in 2019 or earlier, recipients of the past 3 years are ineligible. Ineligible projects, see the guidelines for the complete list, but I do like to point out here, and could have pointed out the community arts grant one is in depth as well. Community arts grant applicants cannot apply to the individual artist commission for artist fees. It's not a way to request additional funds for artist fees or to break a project into multiple categories or into multiple applications. Projects really should be confined to one application. It should not be spread across different categories. So for the community arts grant, if you need to pay artist fees, that should be a part of the community arts grant proposal, and individual artist commissions should not be associated like a presentation that's being funded by community arts grant. Allowable expenses, the focus is, again, artist fees. That you are encouraged to give yourself an artist fee for your time in creating the work. Of course, different artists have different needs in terms of material expenses and other, expenses associated with the project. So I often recommend to artists, when you're work on your budget early on, think about like, what are my, definite expenses that I need funds to get this stuff in place so I can do this project, and balancing that with, okay, what is reasonable to pay myself, not reasonable to pay myself, reasonable for yourself for your time, like that. If you're going to only get paid $100 at the end of this, really think about what is the scope of what you're trying to do, and can you limit the scope to raise your artist fee a little bit, because that has to do with the feasibility of the project, that that you're getting paid for your time. Okay. Other expenses, community outreach, advertising, or marketing efforts, either in getting people involved in the creative process or letting people know about your final presentation, should probably be a minimal expense. The focus again is on the creation fees. Efforts to increase accessibility to arts programming. So any, efforts that you're going to undertake with your presentation or with the involvement in the creative process. If you need to expend some funds to increase the access to that, that's perfectly allowable. Supplies and materials needed to execute the project, art supplies, hardware, memory cards, other consumable equipment. And we can also fund equipment, software, subscriptions, and training needed to execute the proposed project. So individual items in that area may not exceed $1,000. So that might be like you need a camera that's under $1,000, or you need a software or subscription software. Those would be allowable expenses. Now I'll talk a bit more about the public component. So again, there are two options. The first is a public presentation. A public presentation would be something that is open to the public and can be in person or virtual. So it could also be that you're going to do a virtual gallery or a virtual artist talk or something like that. In-person presentations must take place in the artist's county of residence, and artists may charge an admission fee for public presentations. This is, again, it should be a small scale presentation. I would not recommend it taking up more than 25% of your total budget. Think about, this is not the type of grant that can fund maybe like a ton of framing expenses or artist fees paid out to other people. That of course varies. Sometimes there are theater artists, choreographers who, in order to do their final presentation, need to pay some individuals to perform. I would just strongly encourage you to think about how to limit those expenses as much as possible, or seek additional grant funds for those, and have this 2,500 grant really focused on your creation as much as possible. If you're concerned about this, reach out to us and let's talk about it. For public presentation, a word on inclusion. Again, we strive towards broad inclusion and true access to arts and cultural programming for all. And this means thoughtful outreach to as many groups as possible in our region and specific outreach groups to reach underserved audiences. And always keeping in mind that underserved audiences, while it's a term we're using here to talk broadly about many groups of people, is not a monolithic group. And you might want to think very specifically about how you're reaching people that you're trying to get at your event. These are groups, who may have limited access to arts programs, services, or resources due to location, race, economic status, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, religion, disability, or other factors. Now for involvement during the creative process. This is the second option for community for public component. Artists may work with a specific community during the creative process. And that means, not saying like, I'm going to work with the community. That's too broad. It should be more specific, like I'm going to work with kids in Beacon, students in Beacon who are part of this this specific after school group. I've contacted the teacher. We have a partnership. I'm going to work with them during the creative process. It's going to inform the project in some way. I'm going to be setting up in the middle of downtown Poughkeepsie and encouraging people who, of course, I'm going to do some marketing ahead of time to get people to come, but also people who pass by can participate in a collaborative art project that's going to be a part of my work. Then that specific community is, residents in the city of Poughkeepsie, right? So just try to think more specifically about who you're really trying to work with. So this involves directly interacting with community members during the creation of the artwork and involving community members via workshops or as performers of the artist's creative work or in a creation of parallel work by community group. I gave some examples of that earlier. If you want to brainstorm about this is something I love to brainstorm about. So please reach out to us and we can talk about how we could think about aligning your project with the requirements of this grant. And could include maybe interviews with a segment of community or an inclusion of stories or anecdotes from a collected community group. That's just an example of how, or it could be a portrait series. I'm going to do portraits of residents who live in this, specific neighborhood in New Paltz, whatever it might be. Community involvement may be done virtually or in person. Now, some tips about submitting a grant proposal for the individual artist commission. Again, the deadline is March 16th, 2023 at midnight. If you need any assistance in submitting the form, if you need assistance in using, need access to a computer, please reach out to us and I'm happy to help you identify resources or see what we can do to make sure that you are able to apply. And just note, we're going to do an additional application overview session and just look out for that in your email. Attachments for the individual artist commission. You'll need to provide proof of residence dated 2022 or earlier. See the guidelines for a full list of accessible documents. The budget. I'm sorry. This is very sorry. This is point out here. You do not need to download a separate budget form. This is something I should have taken out from last year. The budget form is embedded on the application itself. It's something new that we implemented and it's really great. So you don't have to worry about Excel anymore. So no, you do not need to download a budget anywhere else. It is embedded in the application itself. You'll provide an artist resume or bio or CV. Work samples, see the guidelines for details. You can provide up to 10 files. I'll talk more about this in the application overview session, but work samples are very important to the individual artist commission. They are required. They are the only visual representation that the panel has to understand your work and your project. So please think very carefully about what work samples you're going to provide. And if you want feedback on what work samples would be good for the project that you're proposing, please reach out to us. And that's another thing that I'd love to talk about. You can send me an email with the work samples you're thinking of, and then we can have a chat about it. Additional documents are, not required, but, if you have them, then you're welcome to submit them. These might include letters of support, press articles, marketing samples, etc. And that would be up to 3 additional documents. Some tips about the budget: work on the narrative and the budget together. And I recommend working on the budget first. Check for consistency, meaning, any discrepancies, like, for example, if in one place you say you're going to sell 100 tickets and another place you say you're going to sell 50 tickets. These kind of discrepancies happen all the time because you're working on a big application, and sometimes you miss you miss one area where you made a change. I always recommend using the find feature on your computer and trying to make sure that you have found anything that you've been changing as you work. Check the guidelines for allowable and ineligible expenses. Use the explanation column. You'll see that that is embedded in the budget form itself, and it's a very critical column. It's where you'll explain how you got to a number that is a line item in your budget. Make sure that your grant request is equal to $2,500, as that is the grant amount. And please do not hesitate to ask us to review a draft of your budget. We can review drafts of budgets very quickly, so it is no trouble for us. Just please don't hesitate to reach out. Or to reach out and say, I have no idea how to start my budget, and then we're happy to help you with that too. The review criteria for the individual artist commission: artistic merit, project feasibility, and impact to the project. You'll see that there's more information on these areas in the guidelines, descriptions of them. These are the areas that you will be reviewed on, and they have scoring, numeric scores affiliated with them or associated with them. So just take a look at that in the guidelines, and this is how the panel will be scoring your proposal. So it's important to think about these things and show evidence of the following criteria in your proposal. And of course, they'll consider as well if it addresses one or more of the goals that have been identified for 2023 funding. If you're getting ready to start your individual artist commission, first steps that I recommend are to review the online application form and guidelines, be aware of what's going to be asked of you, complete the project eligibility form so that you can get some feedback about if your project is eligible, and some tips on how to put a competitive proposal in. Organize digital copies of all required attachments. It's never fun to be trying to get your, making sure that the PDFs work and making sure everything is visible on your required attachments at the last minute. So try to do that ahead of time and have those ready to go. You can upload them at any time to your proposal. So I recommend just, uploading them right away. And at any time, make an appointment with Arts Mid-Hudson.